Hi everyone. Oh, sorry, we had a little feedback. Hi, welcome to today's chat. My name is Trinia. I'm a team member here at Understood, and today we're going to be talking about reading interventions and instructional strategies. And this is a question that we get a lot of times from parents, and so we're really lucky to have Margie Gillis here, and she is going to help walk us through this process and talk to us about reading interventions and how we can best support our kids who are struggling with reading. Hi, Margie. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Trinia?
I'm great. Do you want to take just a minute to introduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure. I'm Margie Gillis. I'm the president of Literacy How. Literacy How provides professional development for teachers, K-12, general ed teachers, special ed teachers. We've been doing this work for almost 10 years now. We'll be celebrating in summer. And prior to that, I worked at Haskins Laboratories, translating the research for teachers, mostly in the state of Connecticut, but we also do work in other states as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for being here. To get started, well, I just want to let our viewers know we will be taking your questions today. So if you have a question for Margie, you can go ahead and type it in the comments box. We'll get to as many as we can today. But I want to kick us off with, Margie, maybe you can talk to us about what parents should do first if they notice their kid is struggling with reading. What is like the first step or the first couple of steps they should be taking?
The very first step would be to talk to the child's teacher. So make sure that you have a conversation, that you've noticed things at home, things that are concerning to you as a parent, and then ask for assessment data. So all students should be assessed on a regular basis, and you want to know how the child is doing on the most recent assessments that have been administered, whether they're formal or informal. Either one or both would be important for a parent to look at. And then asking for a conference with the teacher to make sure that the teacher is providing the assessment information and what it means. Often a teacher might assume that the parent knows what a number means or a letter means, but the parent has to advocate and ask very specific questions. What does that information mean? How is my child doing relative to other children, etc.? What are the expectations, the goals that are expected to be met by children at this particular point in time?
Thanks, Margie. We're getting a little bit of feedback on your end. I'm trying to let's see if it'll straighten out. I'm going to ask you, can you talk through how can parents begin this conversation with teachers? What is the way to approach a teacher about this and talk to them about these issues? And I'm sorry if you covered some of this. I was getting a lot of feedback on this end, so it might help clarify for our listeners.
Sure, happy to do that. And if there's anything I can do on my end to help with the feedback, it seemed like we didn't have any trouble when we were chatting, but
it sounds better right now. So hopefully it'll continue.
Let's hope. All right. So just to reiterate a couple things, asking the teacher for assessment information. So any reading assessments that have been administered fairly currently, because old data is old data, but information that's fairly current that would point to whether or not this child is meeting certain goals, and then asking for explanation. So I think a face-to-face meeting is always preferred, and asking the teacher to explain any of the assessment information that a parent might not understand, and getting specific about how does my child do reading words? Does my child have difficulty comprehending the text that he reads, and explaining what the parent is seeing at home that is concerning, because I think it's important for a parent to be able to convey to the teacher what he or she sees that's concerning to them, and that the teacher understands what's happening at home, because there's a mismatch there.
Thank you for reiterating that and clarifying.
Sure.
And can you talk about, are there specific reading programs that are good for kids who are struggling with reading? Are there questions that parents should ask teachers about, what type of reading instruction or strategies are being used in the classroom?
So yes, there are programs that are good, but I usually talk about the importance of the teacher's knowledge relative to the use of a program, and also, is that program the right program? So the first really important question, and I'm going to keep reiterating this, is what is the data showing that my child is having difficulty with? Because in general, there is no one program that's going to hit on all the things that are necessary. Reading is a very complicated thing to do, and it requires a lot of different skills in different areas. So one size doesn't fit all is what I often say to parents. Is there's not a one size fits all approach that's going to hit on everything. And so really, again, going back to the assessment information and getting diagnostic information about what's at work, what's driving the problem, and then selecting a program that actually is matched to that particular difficulty versus trying to hit on everything. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's so important. I know that we're all looking for that one easy answer that we can just use for everyone and it'll work. And unfortunately, that's just not how it is. We're all different, right? All kids are at different stages and might struggle in different areas, just like you were saying, and might need a different approach than the kid sitting next to them. And so, as you were talking about, it's really about the teacher having that knowledge base of how to intervene for each kid with the area where they're struggling. Can you talk a little bit about what are the different areas that kids struggle with reading?
Okay, so the very simplest way of thinking about it is there's two main things that contribute to good reading comprehension. One is word recognition, so being able to look at a word and instantly know what that is, and that is really involves being able to decode words, sound them out. And the other side of what we call the simple view equation is reading comprehension. So two very different things, or not reading comprehension, actually language comprehension. So first, can I read the words and know what they mean? And the other piece is, do I understand language when I hear what's being read to me or spoken to me? And those two things work together, right? But reading comprehension is really involving both of those things. And so if a child has trouble understanding what they read, they could be having trouble because they can't read the words, or they could be having trouble because they can't understand the language, or it could be that they're having trouble coordinating those two things. And so many of our students with learning difficulties have trouble with what we call executive function, something that is part of attention oftentimes. And reading comprehension requires really good executive skills. So thinking about what you're reading about, organizing your thoughts, so that I guess there's really, as I said, there's a lot of complexity around this. And so understanding what the driving force is that is contributing to the child's problem. Mm-hmm. That makes sense?
Absolutely. Are there things that parents can or should be doing at home to help with their kids in these different areas?
There's a lot you can do at home, actually. I think, first of all, if you are a reader yourself as a parent and modeling that, that's certainly great. You know, the old adage, children model what they see, not necessarily what their parent is telling them. So they're observing the parent's behaviors. So just modeling that you are a reader and that you value reading, I think, is super important. I think it's also great to read with your child. So if they really don't like reading, reading to them, it has great value. Reading things that they're interested in learning more about. Because if kids aren't reading themselves, they're not building their background knowledge of the world. They're not building their vocabulary knowledge. So a good substitute for that is for the parent to read to them. And certainly they can also access technology, Learning Ally and Bookshare. So being able to access information through technology is also really very, very valuable. And then making sure that they are encouraging their child, because if they're struggling in school, they're coming home tired, frustrated, demoralized at times, and a parent might get frustrated as well, because they might think, oh, my kid is, a handful when they get home at night. And they're a handful because they've been struggling all day to try to hold it together. When they get home, they let their guard down a little bit, and they have to have the support of a parent who can keep finding the things that they enjoy doing, that they're good at, so that they are counterbalancing the frustration they might be feeling in school, working hard to keep up with their peers.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely can be challenging to spend all day in school if you're really struggling, and then coming home can be like that safe space. And sometimes a safe space means a child might be more likely to act out because they're feeling more comfortable, and they've had to hold it together all day, just like you were saying. I love the ideas that you gave for parents, the modeling and working or reading to children. Especially we had some questions about kids who maybe aren't excited to read on their own or won't do it. And reading to kids can be one of those ways that might be more engaging and interesting to them to do it with a parent. And that can happen at any age, right? Like I was a high school teacher, and I even read to students in my class, and they were fine with it. They liked it. It gave them the chance to chill and just listen, but they were still able to engage in that reading process, which is what we're trying to get them to do and to enjoy reading. And you also mentioned earlier assistive technology, and we oftentimes get questions from parents about when is it good to use audiobooks, and if we are using audiobooks, should the kids be following along in an actual book so that they're practicing, recognizing the words? But do you have any advice for how kids should be using assistive technology?
I'm not an expert, so I will say that. I do think that the technology is absolutely something they should access, and access it as early as they're able to and interested in. I don't think it should take the place of actually reading, because that's a skill that is only going to be developed as they do it. So it's supplemental. It can be complementary. You mentioned, should the child follow along? And ideally, yes, because as they scan, as they're looking at the words as they're being read, they will be processing that information as well. So I think that's a good strategy. Sometimes they don't like to do that because it's extra work, but I do think that there is benefit to doing that. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the assistive technology, I think the key is having somebody who really knows AT well and is up on it, because it's changing all the time. So somebody that can do an eval with a student one-on-one and find out what works for them, because it's such an individual thing. What works for one might not work for another student. So having that process where you're watching, the person doing the eval is watching what the child responds to, what they enjoy doing, what they find beneficial for them.
Mm-hmm. We are starting to get a lot of questions from parents, and I'm going to try to combine some of them so that we can hit as many as we can. We have a couple of questions from parents of older kids, so 12-year-old, 14-year-old, and these kids are still having trouble sounding out words. And one of the parents is saying that their child just wants to skip the word rather than trying to actually sound it out. And the other parent is similarly asking, like, do you have recommendations for helping older kids with these skills and encouraging them to continue working on it? Are there specific strategies or programs that parents could be looking at or teachers could be looking at to help older kids?
Well, I think, yes, never too late. So that's what I always say to parents of older students. It's never too late to teach those foundational skills. If they've missed them or if they just didn't get them solid enough, they definitely have to go back and put those skills in place in order to become proficient with reading. In order to develop reading fluency, you have to be able to read the words accurately first and then automatically second. And there's some relatively new research that David Kilpatrick has brought to light, and that is that kids who have difficulty reading those words, decoding them, instantly recognizing them, may be missing phonemic awareness at an advanced level, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So phonemic awareness is the ability to take a word apart sound by sound, or the reverse of that or inverse of that is to be able to blend the sounds to read a word. So those are underlying important pieces of the puzzle. And a child that has difficulty with decoding often has difficulty with that skill. And the kids that go on to continue to have difficulty with that skill, the 12-year-old, the 14-year-old whose parents wrote in, are sometimes having difficulty at an advanced level. And that means that they might be able to take a word apart and put the sounds back together to blend a word. But where they might struggle is where they're having to do something with the sounds in a word. For example, if I said to you, Trinia, what are the sounds in the word slip? And you'd say, okay, there's that's a little challenging because there's those two little tricky sounds at the beginning of the word that blend, right? Called a blend. If I said to you, now say slip, but don't say the ol sound, what would you say to me?
Sip.
Yes, you got it. Say sip. So you had to take that ol out of the word slip. But you had to hang on to the word slip. You had to know there were those four sounds, and then I had to remove it in order to get to the word sip. That's an advanced skill that, believe it or not, when you practice that skill and practice it in different ways at different levels, that actually gets you to a place where you are better able to read those words instantly and map the sounds and the letters, which is what you do when you read and spell. Mm-hmm. And that's just a little, piece of research that's relatively new. David Kilpatrick, parent could find out a little bit about that. The good news is he's getting lots of traction, and my experience with special ed and even general ed teachers is they've learned a little bit more about this missing puzzle piece that hasn't been incorporated into a lot of the decoding programs that are out there. But good news is teachers are learning about it and bringing that component in.
Mm-hmm. So I know one of the concerns with older students who are still struggling with some of these like foundational reading skills is that the curriculum has moved on, right? And they're trying to work on these higher ordered thinking skills and reading comprehension. And so how can parents and teachers think about balancing these two things? Do kids need to spend extra time outside of the traditional English class working on these skills? In general, like, is that how we should be thinking about it for kids who are struggling with reading? Do they just need extra time and extra instruction in these areas?
That's exactly how you should be thinking about it. Because again, if you can't read the words, you can have all the great comprehension in the world, but it's going to impede your progress. So yes, I think, but you have to do both, because if you're pulling a 14-year-old out of content classes to do this, decoding work, and he's missing out on the content that his peers are learning and certainly are important for his academic success. That's not going to have a good result. So you have to find a way to do both. And, it's not impossible. Sometimes it requires the team coming together and thinking strategically about what that child might miss, at least for a specified amount of time until he does get to master some of those foundational skills. But you can and must do both.
Thank you. We had a couple questions asking about kids who have made progress. So we had an example of a kindergartner was making a bunch of progress, and then in first grade the progress has completely stalled and the child's no longer making progress at all. But maybe to generalize, how can parents talk to teachers, or what should they be thinking through if their child is getting the instruction and just isn't making progress, or if they were making progress and now they're not making progress? What should they be asking the teacher or asking their child about what's going on?
I see. Oh.
Oh, I think maybe you're frozen,
Sorry.
Margie.
It says my connection is poor. Sorry about that.
Okay. It sounds like you're back, maybe?
I hope.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're back. Did you hear my question?
I did.
Okay.
So the question has to do with monitoring the student's progress to make sure that the child isn't getting farther and farther behind, I believe. That's the essence, right?
Yes.
And this is a very important question because we know that it's hard to make up lost time. And the best thing I can advise parents to do is to ask the teacher to check in with them to ensure that number one, the teacher is monitoring the progress with some informal assessment. It doesn't have to be lengthy. It doesn't have to be arduous, but it does have to occur, at least I would say every 3 to 4 weeks. The teacher should be taking stock of where the child is. We call this mastery testing. Mastery testing is, I taught you something over the last 2-3 weeks, and I want to make sure you learned it. So I'm going to give you a quick little informal assessment to make sure you learned what I taught you so that you can go on to the next step. And this works in some aspects of reading, particularly when we're thinking about teaching kids the principles of decoding and how words work. There is a progression and a sequence that lends itself to doing this kind of mastery teaching and mastery learning that I'm discussing and talking about. And if the child isn't, making that adequate progress, then you have to come back to the table and say, okay, what are we going to do to accelerate the progress? Does it mean I have to change up what I'm doing? Does it mean I have to intensify what I'm doing? Does it mean I might have to take the child in the current group he or she is in and put him in a different group that moves at a different pace? So there's different things you can do to look at those data and make sure that the right things are happening.
Great, thank you. We have a very foundational question that came in that I want to make sure that we hit on. This parent asked, what is the correlation or not correlation between IQ and dyslexia?
0.
Thank you. Yep.
There is no correlation. What I like to explain to parents is that there is a continuum, right? There's a bell curve, like for IQ, and there's a continuum for dyslexia. So you can, be dyslexic with a low average IQ, moderate IQ, and a high IQ. But there's no correlation between the two. They're not related. Of course, if you have a high IQ, then you can imagine that remediation will be a little bit easier than it would if you have a low IQ. But you can account for those differences in how you work with the student. Absolutely. And what I think is really important is to convey to the child that it doesn't have anything to do with intelligence, because they start to feel like they're stupid. Mm-hmm. That's what they internalize. So you have to, as a parent, keep ensuring them and give examples of prominent figures, people who have, identified as dyslexic, or a historic figure like Leonardo da Vinci, who is known to be dyslexic, but obviously was a brilliant, brilliant man.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so important to have that conversation with your child, because they already know, like, they're struggling with reading, and a lot of times, especially like in our society, we kind of equate those two things, right? Like reading and IQ as if it's the same thing. And like you're saying, it's definitely not, and there is no correlation between dyslexia and IQ. But sometimes kids might feel that there is, and they might even be getting negative reactions from people around them that makes them think that. And we had a question come in from a parent that was asking about how to prepare their child for those types of negative responses they might get from people. Like, it might be classmates at school, or it might be relatives that are surprised that they don't know how to read such and such thing, or they don't know how to write whatever. And so do you have any recommendations for how to prepare your child to respond to those types of negative reactions they get from other people?
I think the best thing you can do as a parent is to have those conversations with the child and explain when they're able to understand that. And then reading stories to them, telling stories to them. Henry Winkler wrote a series that children love to read about being dyslexic. And, it's a story, but I think having that script and understanding what that would look like as far as interacting with peers, or, as you say, explaining it to Aunt Sally, who doesn't understand. The more children know about that situation and can explain it and feel comfortable with that, then the more comfortable they're just going to be navigating life. So that's, I think, will serve them well, having those conversations.
Mm-hmm. We had a question from, that came in on our YouTube channel about if you have any recommendations for finding leveled reading for kids, or online or in books. Are there book collections, or where can parents look to find the right reading level, and also books that their kids are interested in?
Well, that's a great question. I think interest certainly plays a major role. So finding a text that kids, will read because it's a topic that they find, fascinating. And that would just mean knowing your child and knowing what those fascinations and interests are, and going to a library or bookstore to peruse what's there. And oftentimes people say, use the 5-finger rule. And if in the first page you can't read 5 words, then it's probably too hard. I don't know that I subscribe to that totally. I will say that obviously there's some books that are more challenging than others as far as independent reading level. And the leveling system that's used in schools is challenging for lots of reasons, which I won't go into here. What I will tell you is that some students that struggle with decoding and need practice sounding words out do well for a period of time with something called decodable text. And fortunately, there are more and more texts out there that are decodable. Flyleaf is a publishing company that publishes beautiful texts that are decodable, but not stilted in the way the old-fashioned decodable texts were. High Noon is another publisher that has done a great job of making the text more readable for kids who need some structure to them because they're practicing these decoding skills. So it's a complicated question, but one that I think is really important. Maybe it's something Understood could do a little piece on. I think it would be great.
That's a great idea. And I know we have some articles on our site that have ideas for books that you can go on and look for that type of information. Margie, I think we are out of time, but I want to thank you so much for being here and give you the opportunity if you have any last words of advice or encouragement for parents out there.
My advice to you as parents is to keep learning, because this is a field that changes all the time. The research is continually evolving and teaching us more and more about learning disabilities, dyslexia, attention deficit. So the more you understand as a parent, the better you'll be able to advocate for your child. Good news is we have great resources like Understood that provide support for parents and give you the information that you'll need to help your child. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, if you have a gut feeling, you as a parent know your child better than anyone else. So if you have a gut feeling that there's a problem, there probably is one, and you need to follow that and follow that feeling and find the best advocates that can help you advocate for your child.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, I do just want to acknowledge that we didn't talk about evaluations during this chat, but if you are looking for an evaluation for your child, if you think maybe there's a learning disability or dyslexia going on, you can request an evaluation at your school. And if you're looking for information on how to do that, you can search for it on our site on understood.org. And we have articles that will walk you through that process and help you get that going. And I want to acknowledge we did have some feedback issues at certain points in this chat that I know might have been disruptive for some of our listeners. So we will try to schedule another chat with Margie in the next couple of months so that we can talk more about reading interventions and hopefully not have the feedback issue. But thank you all for sticking with us. There's a lot of great information in this chat. And if you wanted to go back and rewatch any of it, if you missed part of it, it will be archived on our site later today. And you can find all of our upcoming chats and our previous chats on site at u.org/calendar. And if you had a question that didn't get answered today, you can join our community where lots of parents and families are talking to each other, giving each other advice and encouragement. And sometimes our experts like Margie pop in there as well. So you can find that at u.org/community. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.